My family had faith. My sisters abandoned me and let me to decay. They now want me to keep them from going homeless. I therefore allowed them to lose everything. Prior to delving into this episode's main content, I think you should see my point of view. As a 28-year-old man, I grew up in what I believe to be a solid upper-middle-class neighborhood in the Chicago suburbs. At least on the surface, my parents seemed to be in control. Dad provided a good livelihood for our family by working as a financial advisor at a reputable company downtown. Mom was more concerned with upholding the family image, which included being involved in every community group and making sure our family looked fantastic on Christmas cards than she was with her part-time job as a realtor. I was the golden boy who did everything right, their biological son. Straight A's with no effort, athletic and polite to adults by nature. While I wasn't perfect, I did have a lot of issues as a teenager, like holding noisy parties occasionally and sneaking drinks with pals, but nothing major. Nothing that would threaten the family honor my mother worked so hard to maintain. Mom had always desired a daughter, so they adopted Lily, who was then A3F when I was 11 years old. I remember when they took her home. In a matter of minutes, everyone was enamored with a small creature with big brown eyes. At first, I was a bit of a jerk to her, and I'll admit that. All of a sudden, no one was talking about me. Lily's first day of preschool, her dancing recital, and her cute new costume were the center of attention. In hindsight, it was just normal sibling jealousy. However, as we grew older, I felt replaced at the moment. I believed that our connection as siblings was good. Nothing special, just mediocre. I was constantly watching out for her, even if we had periodic arguments. Throughout her second grade year, on the playground, a youngster started pushing her and pulled her hair. One day, when I was in 9th grade, I walked her to primary school and had a rather direct conversation with the little punk. After that, no one bothered her. I even taught her some basic self-defense skills, like how to properly strike someone if it came to that. You know, I was her elder brother. I was killing it by my final year of college. With a 3.85 GPA in business administration and a minor in finance, the captain of our Division II baseball team showed promise for playing in the minor leagues. My friends were strong, the kind of people who would come get you at 3 in the morning or help you relocate. What if your vehicle broke down? I had been lifting weights since high school, and I spent a lot of time in the gym. I was at my best by the time I started college. 315 reps on a bench press, deadlifting 495 and squatting 405. That's what everyone aims for. V-taper, which is pronounced abs, a tiny waist and wide shoulders throughout the year. I don't mean to come out as arrogant, only depicting my current state of existence. Over the years, I had a few serious relationships with girls, but none of them lasted. To tell the truth, I was primarily about my future. After graduation, I was supposed to start a management training program with one of the biggest investment firms in the Chicago region, where Dad had ties. I had a straightforward strategy: finish high school. If I had the chance, I may play baseball for a few more years before going into finance. Eventually, you will find the right woman, get married, start a family, and experience the American dream. In any case, that was the plan. Lily was a sophomore in high school and 15 years old at the time. She became this creative, theatrical child who overreacted to everything and was typically in a school play. However, such is the nature of teenagers. She has pals of her own. We would get together for dinner and catch up on typical sister activities when I returned home from college during breaks. Or so I believed. In retrospect, I missed certain clues, including her resentment. When Mom and Dad boasted about my baseball achievements, her tinny comments about how lucky I was, and her propensity to fabricate elaborate tales about events at school that couldn't possibly be real. But 2020 is hindsight, isn't it? In my senior year, it was a Tuesday in October. After we lost a weekend series to our top opponents, I just finished a horrible practice in which the coach pounded us into the ground. After too many bullpen sessions, my shoulder was painful but in a good way, and my legs felt like jelly. As if you exerted all of your physical energy, and it answered. On the drive to my truck, the F-150 my parents had helped me buy for my 20th birthday, I showered, changed into slacks and a sweatshirt, and looked at my phone. Holy 37 missed calls, 54 texts, and family and friend messages that had the words, "You're sick? How could you? You're also dead." My heart started pounding rapidly. My initial thought was that either Grandma or Grandpa had passed away. I called Dad right away. What on earth is happening? When he answered, I asked. I had never heard his voice before. It was cold and nasty. Now get your ass home. You dare not go anywhere. He hung up after that. In an attempt to understand what was happening, I paused in the parking lot and stared at my phone. Mom answered the phone when I phoned her. My high school best friend, who still lived close to my parents, didn't pick up when I called him either. Everyone seemed to have just concluded that I was radioactive. My stomach was in knots the entire time NPR was on the radio, but I was unable to hear a word they were saying, so I drove the 20 minutes home in a daze. I spotted my Uncle Mike's car and a few other automobiles when I pulled into the driveway. My father's younger brother, Uncle Mike, was a grumpy construction contractor who had never won me over. Before I could go. From the front porch, Uncle Mike rushed toward me, yanked open the door of my truck, snatched my shirt, and shoved me against the side of the vehicle. "I will murder you!" He shouted only a few inches away from me. His breath smelled like booze and his spit brushed my face. I had never seen eyes like his before. They were crazy. I could have escaped with ease. I was a 22-year-old athlete in my peak and Mike was 50 and in poor shape. However, I was too astonished to react. He was shoved away from me inside by Dad and my other Uncle Steve. Dad remarked, avoiding eye contact with me. I went into the living room after climbing the front steps. It was crowded. Mom's eyes were puffy and red from crying while she sat on the couch. There were both sets of grandparents looking glum, uncles, aunts, and even close relatives. And my sister Lily was crying onto her grandmother's shoulder while cuddled up against her. The area fell quiet as soon as I entered. My blood ran cold as everyone looked at me with contempt and fear. "What on earth is happening?" I yelled, looking around the room for hints about what was going on. Mom raised her head. I had never seen her face contort with hatred and rage before. "How were you able to—" "Your own sister. What are you discussing?" I inquired, looking around for a response. As a financial counselor, Dad continued to maintain his typically calm demeanor. "Lost. He appeared to want to use his bare hands to rip me to pieces. Lily filled us in on everything, including the fact that you had been entering her room at night for years. I was hit like a freight train by the accusation. I was out of breath. The room started to spin." "What? That's crazy. She was never touched by me." Lily was crying. "Now it's harder. No one would believe me," you claimed. "You claimed that if I informed you, it would harm you. It was our secret," you claimed. "That is—" I let out a scream as my awe turned to anger. "That's not what I ever stated. She has never been harmed by me." "What on earth is happening, Dad?" And Uncle Steve intervened to stop Uncle Mike from lunging at me once more. "My friend works as a police officer. You chunk of soft rock, you're going to prison. You will be loved by them." "They are." It was like speaking to a stone wall when I tried to explain myself and demonstrate how absurd this was. No one was paying attention. Lily began to fabricate things that never happened and recall more details. She said I touched her for the first time when she was 10 years old and I was on Christmas break from high school. Since then, they said it has occurred many times. I threatened to harm her parents if she informed anybody. They were all nodding, consoling her, and glaring at me as she lied about everything she said. It seemed strange, like if I had entered a parallel universe where everything was inverted. Then Dad lost it. Something snapped inside of him, even though he had always been subdued and never aggressive. With a right punch that would have made a heavyweight boxer's proud, he came right up to me. I collapsed after being hit in the jaw, tasting blood where my teeth had cut my cheek. "Gather your belongings and leave." He stood over me and flexed his hand, shouting, "You're no son of mine." Some of my clothing had already been placed in garbage bags by Mom. They were close to the entrance. Dad reached into my wallet and removed every card bearing his name, including health insurance and credit cards. "Please, Dad. This is untrue." Blood trickled from my fractured lip as I pleaded, "I've known you my entire life. I would never do anything like this, you know." I was thrown down the front stairs by him after he grabbed my shirt and dragged me to the door. I felt something break when I fell hard on my shoulder. It turned out to be a little separation. The clothes came in bundles. "Next, my baseball equipment." "I'll kill you myself if you ever come near this family again," he snarled, slamming the door. My face was covered in blood, my shoulder ached, and neighbors were watching the chaos from windows as I sat on the lawn. In less than an hour, my whole life had suddenly fallen apart. I sat in my pickup in the parking lot of the baseball field that night, trying to make sense of what had happened. I had trouble falling asleep. I often reenacted the situation, attempting to understand how Lily could accomplish this and how my parents could have complete faith in her. My jaw was purple and swollen by morning, and I was barely able to lift my arm due to shoulder pain. Ryan, a teammate, agreed to let me stay on his sofa for a week when I phoned him. Despite their disapproval, his housemates put up with me. I attempted to contact all of my relatives, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, and people I had known my whole life by phone, text, and email. Except for one communication from Dad, there were no answers. "I'll submit a restraining order if you get in touch with us again. For us, you are no longer living." Ryan made an effort to assist. "You should call the cops, dude. Report your father's abuse of you. Get ahead of this. However, I was unable to. I couldn't get over the fact that this was truly happening for some reason. I kept hoping my parents would realize how ridiculous it was and wake up. To be honest, I was afraid. What if Lily refused to give up? What if she was believed rather than me? How could I definitively demonstrate that I didn't do anything? I got an email from the university 2 weeks later. I paid my semester's tuition beyond the due date. The midterm had been canceled by my parents. I tried to get an emergency loan at the financial aid office, but I was unsuccessful since I had no cosigner and had a short credit history. In order to work full-time and pay for even that, I had to reduce most of my studies to part-time status. At first, the coach was nice and let me remain on the team, but I missed a lot of sessions since I was working as a security guard at a pub that I didn't often play at. I moved from being on the dean's list to barely passing after my grades fell. Stories were circulating and friends started to shun me. A family member told someone who in turn told someone else. It's like that. No one in front of me called me a predator. However, I became aware of how others regarded me, how females would shift away if I sat next to them in class, and how conversations would halt when I walked into rooms. Then my truck broke down 4 months later. There was a crack in the engine block. Thousands need to be fixed. It was beyond my means. In addition to my job as a bar security guard, I also lost my delivery job. I couldn't afford the rent at the dilapidated apartment I shared with 2 other guys, so I was kicked out. After the coach gave me the code, I began sleeping in the baseball team's equipment shed, showering in the changing area. I used the last of my meal plan to eat 1 meal a day at the cafeteria. One night in February, Coach saw me there. I was wearing 3 hoodies and a sleeping bag with my duffel bag acting as a pillow, and it was below zero outside. Rather than lose his temper, he took a seat on the floor next to me. "What the devil happened to you, son?" His voice was earnest and worried as he asked. I told him everything. My parents' response to the charge was interrupted. "I'm going to lose my truck." The apartment. In fact, he was the first to hear the whole tale. He didn't call me a liar after I was done, nor did he declare that he believed me. Simply nodded and sat for a minute without saying anything. "Until the end of the semester, you are welcome to remain here. I'll assist you figure something out after that." He got me an excellent air mattress and a space heater the next day. He began asking me to join him for supper once a week. Every time his wife would pack leftovers for me to bring home. It was something, but not much. Someone is concerned. I barely escaped academic probation and had a 2.1 GPA at the end of the year, but baseball was over for me. The fire had been extinguished. I got a summer job at a Colorado wilderness program for disturbed youngsters thanks to Coach. Isn't that ironic? But it kept me fed, provided refuge in a staff cabin, and paid cash. I didn't go back to school that autumn. Remained in the wilderness program and started working as a guide full-time. Hiking mountains and teaching survival techniques to affluent kids whose parents didn't know what to do with them took up days. Carrying 50-pound weights up mountains, cutting wood, and building shelters were all physically demanding chores that helped me rebuild my body. In 6 months, gained 15 pounds of pure muscle. Together with the other guides, I would get really inebriated at night. During my free time, I tried with everything I could find, such as cocaine, cannabis, LSD, and mushrooms. Lacked caution. Didn't give a damn. I was trying to ignore the fact that my old life had been lost forever when a man died in a climbing accident that I might have prevented if I hadn't been suffering from a hangover. I was approached by the director of the RIP program. "When you're on, Jake, you're among our greatest guides. You are respected by the children. You are a liability when you act like a way, even when you are an expert in your profession. When you're destroying yourself, I can't hold you accountable for the lives of children." The next day, I lost my job. I lived in my new beater vehicle, a 1998 Honda Civic that I bought for $1 and $200 cash for the following year. I took on any jobs I could find, such as construction security, event work, bar bouncing, and day labor. Any job where I could take advantage of my physique and nobody would question me too much about my background. I stayed away from ladies completely. I stayed away from relatives. If a youngster sat too close to my table at a restaurant, I would immediately leave. The fear of being involved once more was debilitating. I dreamed of being incarcerated and the other prisoners discovering why I was there. My heart would pound so violently that I thought I was having a heart attack and I would wake up in a cold sweat. I once worked security at a Fort Collins College bar. I recognized a man who had played football at my previous institution. He also recognized me. He started telling his acquaintances about me and the charges against me. When it was all over, they were all staring at me and talking loudly enough for me to hear actual predators getting ill. He needs to be disciplined by someone. I made an effort to ignore it. At 2 a.m., I completed my work. I leaped into the parking lot after escorting the last of the guests out and making my way to my car. They had been waiting with 3 of the previous men. They accused me of being a predator and a pedophile. They promised to ensure that I couldn't harm anyone else. I retaliated, delivered some strong blows, and undoubtedly smashed one of the guys' noses. However, they had the advantage of surprise, and it was 3-on-1. I suffered a dislocated shoulder, a damaged eye socket, 3 broken ribs, and a concussion. When a car came into the parking lot, the man with the broken nose must have scared them because they hurried away. An ambulance was called by the driver. I was discharged with nowhere to go after spending 2 nights in the hospital. I had a $17,000 medical bill that I was unable to pay and no health insurance. The pain is hardly relieved by the drugs they gave me. I was unable to work due to my injuries. I took sponge baths, slept in my car, and used the restrooms at gas stations and Walmart parking lots. Then I was able to raise my arms. I simply determined that I was done. In the middle of the night, it started to rain. I parked my Civic, walked to the center, went over the fence, and drove to an old bridge outside town that was high enough to jump. Every movement made my ribs scream in agony. How long I stood there is a mystery to me. I gazed down at the dark lake saturated by the rain. I was holding my phone, 3 years with no phone calls or messages. My family keeps to itself. I had no one coming to save me. It didn't matter to anyone if I lived or died. You believe it was time for a swim, I almost slid because I was so terrified by the voice. With pain shooting through my broken ribs, I held onto the railing with my good arm. I turned to find a man in his 70s standing there with a fishing rod in his jacket. "Leave." With a shaky voice, I whispered. He calmly answered, "Can't do that, son," as though we were having a normal conversation on a lovely day. "Check to see if you jump when I go. In a sense, that makes me accountable. You have nothing to do with it. The moment I saw you, it became my problem. That's the way life is." He approached steadily but not menacingly. "Frank is my name, Marine Corps retiree. I've witnessed many men reach their breaking point. Would you mind explaining to me why you are standing on the wrong side of this railing? You wouldn't comprehend." "Give me a try." I don't know why, but I informed him about the last 3 years and the accusation being dropped. Perhaps because I thought I would die soon anyhow. Maybe because he wasn't a stranger and didn't treat me like a monster right away. Perhaps there was something in his eyes that made me think of my grandpa, who, if he hadn't been suffering from dementia, would have been the only member of my family to believe me. He only nodded when I was done, similar to what my last coach did. Then he said something I will always remember. "You've had enough of carrying this alone, son. For one night, put the weight down. Come eat something spicy. Dry off, and tomorrow we'll discuss it rationally." Why would you provide a hand to me? You're not sure if I'm being honest. Even in the dim light, Frank's eyes were sharp. I have 50 years of experience reading men's looks, both in war and in peace. Either you're speaking the truth or you're the most brilliant liar I've ever encountered. Death is irreversible in any case. Food isn't. I had the option to ignore him. I could have leaped anyhow. I occasionally question why I didn't. However, there was something about his conviction. I had to climb back over the barrier because of his composure in the face of my storm. Frank lived in a modest but orderly house. It was all executed with military accuracy. Shoes went parallel to the door, and books were arranged neatly on shelves. He handed me his son's dry clothing, which had been lost 10 years before in Afghanistan. While he was cooking, he forced me to take a hot shower. I slept out on Frank's couch that night. For the first time in what felt like years, I actually fell asleep. He made me breakfast in the morning. Coffee, bacon, and eggs, strong enough to wake the dead. Then he gave me a job offer. He claimed to be the owner of a small security company that offered wealthy clients executive protection, event security, and other specialized services. We wanted a young, strong man who could keep his mouth shut and obey directions. Why would you put your confidence in me for such a thing? I asked for an explanation. I just met you. I was on the verge of suicide. Frank gave me a direct look because even if he isn't aware of it yet, a guy who chooses to back off when he is pushed to the brink has something worthwhile to live for. Additionally, I know precisely where to look if you let me down. I worked for Frank's firm and lived in his guest room for the following 6 months. At 5 in the morning, he was a jerk. Exercises stringent rules and a ban on drinking on work evenings. Forced me to visit the doctor for my wounds. He paid the costs on his own and promised to reimburse me when I recovered. He was fair though. They kindly compensated me. In addition to teaching me how to dress professionally and deal with clients, they also educated me about investing in finance. Additionally, he urged that I see a therapist who specialized in PTSD, an old friend of his who served in Vietnam. At first I objected, but Frank would not accept no. "Son, your bell has rang. You need to clear your brain as well as your body, if you're going to be my employee." The treatment was beneficial. Taught me gradually that I wasn't responsible for what occurred, that I didn't deserve it, and that I wasn't permanently harmed. I collected enough money after 6 months to purchase my own home, a little apartment, nothing extravagant, just mine, safe and hygienic. At my community college, I started enrolling in business management courses and earning some security certifications. Frank started to look like the dad I had lost. He never suggested that I try to clean my name or put any pressure on me to get in touch with my relatives. "Some battles aren't worth fighting," he remarked simply. "Pay attention to the war, constructing a life that they cannot take away." I worked for Frank for a year before he gave me the responsibility of managing security for the opening of his niece's art gallery, and I can see that he was playing matchmaker, even though he said it was a favor for his sister. Sophia did not live up to my expectations. Though accurate, Frank's description of her as smart as a whip and doesn't take scam arts from anyone was incomplete. There was something strange about her attractiveness. Bright emerald eyes that seemed to look straight through you, tall and muscular. The asymmetrical style of her dark hair beautifully framed her face. She is striking in the sense that her presence alone attracts attention rather than being conventionally gorgeous in the sense of a magazine cover. We didn't immediately click. She thought I was just an incompetent, muscle-bound security guard. I thought she was a conceited art snob. I heard her describing an abstract picture to a potential purchaser during the event, then rolling her eyes when they departed without making a purchase. Not everybody understands it. I didn't mean to start a discussion when I answered. She examined my security outfit, looking me up and down. "Do you too?" "I'm not acting like I do, but I'm also not actually." She almost grinned. Nearly. Sincerity. Revitalizing. I could see her watching me all night long. Inquisitive, yet not enough to ensure that the security guard isn't taking anything. As part of my duties, I was looking about the room, inspecting the doors, and monitoring the most costly stuff. Professional but unobtrusive alert. At the end of the night, when I was wrapping up and the final individuals were heading out, she came up to me. "Uncle Frank asserts that you are more than your physical attributes." "Your uncle speaks too much," I answered. She chuckled. Instead of the fake social giggle I had heard all evening, it was a real good laugh. In fact, he seldom ever speaks. That's why people pay attention when he does. "You're going to school," he adds. "Management of a business, yes, along with a few specific security certifications. A fascinating combo. Describe it to me." We spoke till 2 in the morning. Nearly everything excluding my history. She was funny, challenging, and smart in all the right ways. I've taken a lot of trips and held strong opinions about politics, music, and the arts, but I also listened to others. She gave me her card when I finally explained that I had to go since I had an early training session with a new customer. "My unit has a security problem. Locks must be updated. Perhaps you might discuss with me." The rationale was obvious. I did, however, accept it. Dinner, movie evenings, and weekends spent together followed that consultation. I had never dated someone like Sophie. Dedicated to her work and fiercely independent, she may be vulnerable in private. Because pain knows suffering, she had been hurt, but not in the same way that I had. I refrained from talking about my family for months. I made up some vague stories when she asked. They said I was the only kid and that my parents had perished in a car accident. Although Sophie could tell I was keeping something from her, she didn't ask. Frank, however, demanded that I tell the truth. "You've got that gal in your sights." One day at work, as we were setting up security for an upcoming event, he stated, "And she's capturing your heart before anything is revealed. She deserves to know the truth." Any further. He was right. So, one night in my apartment over dinner, I told her everything, the whole awful tale. I thought she would leave, would give me a new look, would think Lily wasn't lying. Rather, she said, "Thank you for trusting me," while holding my hand across the table. "I think you're real." Frank excluded. I had never heard these 3 words from anybody else. At the dinner table, I started crying uncontrollably. She just gave me a hug and let me fully express myself. I proposed 2 years after we first met. Was the location of our first real date where it was written down on one knee holding a ring. Heart-pounding. Her own father had passed away years prior, so Frank escorted her down the aisle. We bought a little house in a peaceful area. Began constructing a genuine life. After completing my degree, I joined Frank's business as a partner. We developed a reputation for expertise and secrecy as we progressed from local security to regional and then national contracts. Sophie's career as an artist took off. Her art first sold well when it was displayed in large galleries. We discussed forming a family. At last I felt content. At last relaxed. There were less nightmares. I could be among children without being scared. After learning bits and pieces of the real story from others, I even got back in touch with a couple of my old college mates. My former existence seemed far away, as though it had occurred to someone else. My family is still on my mind. I pondered whether they had ever questioned Lily's story, if they ever felt remorse for their actions. However, I had acknowledged that chapter was over. Now I had a new family, those who chose and encouraged me. That was enough, or so I believed. In March, it was a haphazard Tuesday. A wealthy tech CEO was coming to my office for a meeting and needed discreet protection, so I was at my office researching security procedures for the event. I was buzzed on the intercom by my helper. "On line 1, sir, you have a call." The woman said there was a family situation but would not reveal her identity. Frank or Sophie came to mind initially. I had her go through it. I picked up the receiver. "Hi there, it's Jake." Is absolutely not my real name. Quiet. Then a cry. "It's Jake. Mom is here." My body grew cold. It had been 7 years since I last heard her voice. I wanted to end the call. I wanted to yell. I just said, "What do you want, Waka, instead? Don't hang up, please." She pleaded, "We must speak with you. It's crucial. It's been 7 years since we last spoke. It couldn't be that significant." I spoke in a cold tone. Lily admitted. She told lies about everything. She made it up. The entire world stopped. Suffering for 7 years, I'm referring to a fresh start. Regarding treatment panic episodes and nightmares, all because of a lie. Hearing her admit it was a lie even though I knew it was. "Are you there, Jake?" I ended the call. I left the workplace on foot. I drove to Frank's residence and instructed my assistant to postpone our appointments. I told him, and all he did was nod and ask, "What do you want to do?" "I'm not sure." "You do indeed. Simply put, you're not sure if it's the appropriate thing to do." He was right. I wanted to ignore them part of myself, remove them from my life forever. Answers were needed for another section. I needed the truth to be told to me straight. When I told Sophie that night, she felt the same way. She clarified that you require closure. But whatever you choose, I'm with Jake and you. Nothing between us changes as a result of this. Whatever happens, I'm still here, Mom. Dad and even relatives who had cut me off years ago started calling and texting me, but I ignored them for 2 weeks. My therapist and I discussed it. I do have one. I'm not ashamed to admit it. At last I realized that I had to face them only on my terms. I texted my mom from a coffee shop on Main Street, which is a public location. 2 p.m. on Sunday, you, Dad, and Lily are alone. I'll be accompanied by people. One opportunity only. Sunday arrived. Frank demanded to be the backup. Sophie stood beside me, clutching my hand till it nearly hurt. We got there early. In order to observe all of the entrances and exits, I grabbed a table in the corner. It's a persistent old security behavior. I felt a knot in my gut. I still kind of expecting them not to show up, or that this was some kind of clever trick. Sophie kept checking on me. Anxiety clouded her gaze. "We are free to depart at any moment." "All right. Simply utter the word." They arrived at exactly 2 p.m. Mom seemed older than I had recalled. The face is wrinkled with concern and the hair has grown past brown. Dad looked gaunt since he had dropped so much weight. His expensive attire were swapped out for a faded button-down and khakis. Lily, who is now 22, didn't look like the adolescent I remembered. She had a thinner face. She had a sad expression on her face. Her typical dramatic flair was absent. Mom's eyes brimmed with emotions when she saw me and rushed forward to embrace me. I moved to the side, putting Sophie in a position halfway between us. "Take a seat." For what felt like minutes, nobody said anything. Dad cleared his throat after a while. "We, son, I'm not your son," I cut him off. 7 years ago, you were pretty explicit about that. Now speak." "Why have I come here?" Mom burst into tears. Dad appeared to be broken. Lily continued to gaze at the ground. It was 3 months ago. Dad's voice was strained. Lily convened a meeting of the family. "I've lied about everything," she said. I gave Lily a glance. "Take a look at me." Her eyes were red with tears as she slowly lifted them. Why, her voice sounded different. She took a tentative breath. "I felt envious. As a son, you were ideal. You were a brilliant thinker and a terrific athlete, and everyone loved you. You got everything from your parents. I wanted them to take notice of me and love me more. You made an accusation against me that may have led to my imprisonment. ruined my entire existence. I thought I had dealt with my anger years ago, but it came back. I didn't anticipate it going that far. She whispered. I assumed they would just be upset with you and perhaps even ground you. But I was unable to retract it after everyone started asking questions. Then it simply continued. I was treated really nicely by everyone who gave me gifts and made me feel valued. I had no idea how to put an end to it. As well as you. I glanced at my parents. Without even hearing what I had to say, you threw me out. Without evidence. Dad tried to explain why we thought we were keeping her safe. Our tiny girl was her. I was also your son. The coffee shop fell quiet when I smacked my fist on the table. Everyone at the nearby tables was listening, even if they tried not to. I didn't even spend the 4th of July weekend at home. She asserted. Pictures from a baseball event I attended in Denver were widely shared on social media. Have you checked it all? Mom covered her lips with her palm. Dad became white. After you kicked me out? Do you know what happened next? My vehicle broke down. My apartment was gone. I slept in the shed with the baseball equipment. People who heard tales beat me up, and I nearly perished from exposure. The family who was meant to adore me thought the worst, so I stood on a bridge prepared to leap. Not even a question. I pulled out my phone. I showed them pictures of myself from the bar fight with the broken lip and black eye. My hospital records from the beating and me looking haggard during my time of homelessness. Your son was me. My voice cracked. Sophie gave my hand a squeeze. Frank grounded me by placing his hand on my shoulder. We sincerely apologize, Mom cried. We made a grave error. We wish to put things right, put things correctly. It wasn't amusing yet, I laughed. How are you going to accomplish that? Return 7 years of my life to me? Put an end to the nightmares. Reverse the anguish of homelessness, of suffering a beating, of being on the bridge, all set to die. Mom was crying all the time now. In the last 5 minutes, Dad seemed to have aged 10 years. You should return home, please, Dad went on in an almost audible voice. We want to reunite as a family. That will not take place. I've got a family already. I glanced at Frank and Sophie, who were genuinely there for me. At last, Lily raised her voice. You ought to be aware of something else as well. She described how everything changed once she came clean. While I was sleeping in my vehicle, my parents had cut her off financially and sold the BMW they had bought her for her 16th birthday. She had to leave her expensive private institution to work in retail while going to a community college for night studies. They had to move from their big house to an apartment since Dad's business had failed due to some poor investments. Word got out about Lily's deceit, which hurt Mom's reputation in the town. Jake, we need your assistance. Mom eventually looked uncomfortable as she acknowledged. Your father's company is having trouble. The condo is likely to be lost. Lily is unable to pay for her further education. For the most part, we have had to sell everything. And there it was. Forgiveness was not what they want. Their goal was to make money. I burst out laughing. I was unable to resist. Let me clarify. You ruin my life, deny me, make me homeless, and you want me to save you now that I've succeeded in life. To get even with you, we are related. Dad muttered something. Recall that we aren't. I got to my feet. Your decision was made 7 years ago. You can now accept it. Lily begged, please. Her cheeks were wet with tears. Mom and Dad shouldn't have to bear the consequences of my error, even if I know I don't deserve forgiveness. You're correct. They ought to pay for their error. I glanced at my parents. I pardoned Lily. She was a young girl who made a bad decision. However, as adults, you both ought to have safeguarded your 2 kids. Instead, you thoughtlessly tossed one away. I put cash for our coffee on the table. Mom took hold of my arm as we were heading out. Don't leave it this way, please. How can we proceed? What are you looking for from us? I looked at her for a while. I want you to experience what it's like to lose everything. To feel powerless. To be unbelieved by others. Then perhaps you'll realize what you've done to me. Frank, Sophie, and I left as we got closer to the car. Frank gave me a shoulder squeeze. Son, I'm proud of you. 2 years have passed since that incident. My parents lost their condominium, which I found out about through common contacts. At the moment, Dad works at a big box store. Mom does housework. Lily left school completely and moved to a different state. I think about reaching out sometimes. According to Sophie, that would be the last phase of my recovery and forgiveness. For my own gain, not theirs. It's my choice, Frank adds, adding that he will continue to assist me in the interim. My own family is my top priority. Our first kid is on the way thanks to Sophie. The security company will now operate in 3 other states. Make something tangible that is irreplaceable. To respond to some frequently asked questions, edit 2. Yes, I considered accusing Lily of making misleading statements, but my state's statute of limitations has passed. No, I don't feel bad about not being able to provide for my parents. The bed was prepared by them. Indeed, Sophie's pregnancy is doing nicely. I appreciate you asking. The third edit. Since Lily was only a kid when this occurred, many of you believe I should help her. Perhaps you're correct, but she wasn't 5 years old enough to comprehend what she was doing. She was 15. Before coming honest, she let me to suffer for 7 years. Still, I might give her a call eventually. Just not quite ready. For those who are unsure if I will allow my parents to meet their grandchild, I have made an edit. To be honest, I have no idea. Will the delivery room be where they are? Not at all. Will they ever watch children? Absolutely not. However, perhaps monitored visits in the future, when I'm sure they won't use more lies to turn my child against me, and only if they take full responsibility and undergo extensive rehabilitation. Fifth edit. This news is being referred to as a fake by some. In any case, have faith in anything you desire. I would make something up, but why? In order to process and maybe assist those who have been falsely charged, I came here. Not for points on the internet. Edit number 6. We appreciate everyone who left a remark with similar experiences. Being aware that I'm not alone in this helps. And to the one who inquired as to why I no longer despise all women. I'm not an incel who thinks that a single person's behavior defines a gender. My wife is a woman, in case you were unaware. Story 2. After taking $20,000 out of my sister's retirement, my parents attempted to raise my rent. I left them to deal with her mess on their own once I moved out. I'm a typical 25-year-old who put a lot of effort into finishing college and landing my first teaching position in an elementary school. Although it's not a high-paying job, I like working with kids, so it's worth it. However, money is scarce, particularly in the beginning. I have been living with my parents in the suburban home where I was raised because of this, although it's not the most interesting setup, it works. As my father used to say, they charge me a reasonable rent and I purchase my own groceries. Furthermore, I assisted with tasks like mowing the lawn, repairing household items, and even organizing the garage after my dad suffered a back injury last summer. It is only temporary, but it is not glamorous. My goal was to save money, remain for a few years, and eventually acquire a place of my own. Easy, isn't it? Until my elder sister Brielle came back into the scene, everything was simple. To put it simply, 32-year-old Brielle has never been the responsible kind. Growing up, she was the most well-behaved youngster. She could do no wrong in our parents' eyes, but I'm not sure if it was because she was the eldest or just because they liked her. She has 2 college dropouts. She lacked motivation the first time. She protested about the instructor's excessive demands the second time. She's never worked for more than a few months in a job. She would quit and make up an excuse that it wasn't her fault when things didn't go her way. Our parents were always there to support her. Is your rent past due? They would cover the cost. Has your vehicle broken down? They would pay for the repair. Have you been given a citation for speeding while writing the check? Mom would mutter about how the cops prey on young women. In the meanwhile, I was taking out loans to pay for school and saving money for college by cleaning toilets at a diner. I believe that Brielle had been living alone for the last few years. As it turned out, she had been living in different apartments, always behind on her rent, and depending on our parents to support her. Before she approached me one day and casually said that she was pregnant, I was unaware of this. I'm not here to criticize people's decisions in life, but let's use Brielle as an example. The situation was far from steady. She had been seeing the child's father for a few months, and based on my observations, he wasn't thrilled about the unexpected pregnancy. As soon as she told him, he essentially disappeared. This should serve as a wake-up call for Brielle, right? Maybe she recognized she needed to order her life at this point. However, no. Rather, she hurried straight to her parents, who went into mending mode right away. They started remodeling the basement into a little apartment for her within a week. Even a kitchenette was constructed. I heard Mom mention drawing from their retirement funds, but I didn't inquire about the source of the funds. To be honest, I didn't care about it, so I tried to avoid becoming involved. They could decide to hurl cash at Brielle and Jatanis alums. I could already see the writing on the wall, though. My parents have a tendency to cause problems for everyone else. They seem to think that no matter how great of a disaster she has caused, we must all work together to help her. I told myself at first that I wouldn't mind. In order to provide Brielle her own place, a tiny apartment was being constructed in the basement. I thought she would move in, take care of herself, and I would get on with my life. Seeing everyone go above and above for her once more was a little annoying, but I made an effort to ignore it. That way of thinking worked for about 2 months. Then little items started to accumulate. first, even though I was working full-time and usually returned home exhausted, my mother began urging me that I should spend more time with Brielle because she was going through so much. Then the subliminal guilt trip started. You know, Brielle doesn't have anyone else to lean on right now, Mom would add. Being pregnant and unmarried is really difficult. She would do this while staring at me as though I were supposed to solve all of Brill's problems. Dad's condition has not improved significantly. He would always find a way to bring up Brielle in the conversation. Riley, you ought to be thankful for everything in your life. During supper, he passed the salt and died. You're not as fortunate as everyone else. Luckily, I was barely making ends meet, attempting to save money and build a career. Brielle, meanwhile, received a fully renovated apartment and continued financial and emotional support. However, when I overheard Mom and Dad conversing one evening, things became heated. I was in the kitchen brewing tea while they were in the living room. Once the baby comes, she's going to need a lot of help, she said. Dad said, of course we'll all help. Everything, Mom asked. Well, Riley, you and me, Dad said as though it were obvious. I nearly let my cup fall. Although they had not disclosed this plan to me, it was clear that they had already decided I would participate. I became nervous at that point. I could tell they were working on something that would bring me into Brill's mess whether I wanted it or not, even if I didn't know the specifics yet. The terrible feeling was made worse by Ariel's repeated visits. She would fall on the couch and complain about how hard it was to be pregnant and how awful her ex's departure was. She would mention in passing that I was lucky to have a steady career and no kids to worry about. In the back of my mind, I kept asking myself, why does this always fall on me? But I bit my tongue every time to avoid starting a fight. I had a terrible feeling that something was going to happen by the time we had supper that evening. I knew it wouldn't be good, but I couldn't tell what it was. I had the unshakable sensation that something was about to happen when we sat down to dinner. When everyone is behaving too casually as though they are all hiding something from you, you can tell. It felt like that. Brielle was looking through her phone as her parents talked about the neighbor's new fence and other unrelated subjects. It seemed forced, like they were holding off on dumping something on me until the right moment. My father's favorite dinner was spaghetti. We must talk about food as a family. I have no idea why. Not that pasta makes bad news any easier to take in. I made an effort not to overthink things and to focus on my plate. Mom cleared her throat, though, around halfway through the meal. Thus, we have been considering, she murmured, glancing at her father. I went cold. Those remarks never lead to anything positive. Brielle will require assistance as she returns home, Mom remarked in a friendly tone. What specifically do you need assistance with? I asked, keeping my voice as neutral as possible. Before she could reply with the baby, Dad leaped in. Naturally, it will be difficult for Ariel to handle everything by herself because she has a lot on her plate right now. I turned to face Brielle, who continued to browse through her phone as like this subject didn't concern her. She didn't even raise her head. All okay, but how is that related to me? I put down my fork and asked, as though they were attempting to figure out how to phrase whatever they were about to say. My parents exchanged one of those looks. As a teacher and everything my mother remarked, you already live here and you're really good with kids. We decided that you should assist with babysitting. Assistance. I raised an eyebrow and asked again. Dad gave a kind nod. Yes, just watch the baby until Brielle gets back on her feet, you know. It would not be a full-time position, just when you're at home. I was shocked by what I heard. Do you want me to work a full-time job and watch a newborn, Ed? Mom said, well, you have 3 more days at home. Additionally, you don't pay market rent. As if that mattered, Dad replied. I looked at them, attempting to decipher their question. They weren't only requesting little help, they wanted me to do a whole second job for nothing. I leaned back in my chair and whispered, wait, let me clear this up. You want me to look after Brill's baby mom's side when I get home from teaching all day, like I was intentionally being tough? Riley, it's not like that. We will all contribute, everything. I said it again. Dad said yes. All of us are related. Family members also support one another. Then, as Riley was using her phone, Brielle looked up. She smirked as she yelled, I had no idea that assisting your sister meant so much to you. Below the table, I could feel my hands clenching into fists. Her speech sounded so entitled that I didn't want to lose my temper. That's not the point, I said. I work for myself and have my own life. I can't simply leave everything to watch the kids. You're being self-centered. Mom spoke harshly at first. Riel is now going through a really difficult period. Helping her is the least you can do. Why am I supposed to correct her decisions? I raised my voice and asked, even though I tried to keep my cool. Her age is 32. She is no longer a child. Brielle abandoned me. Do you mean me? Take a look. Take a look. That's sufficient. Dad spoke in a harsh tone. Together we are in this. We expect you to contribute since you live with us whether you like it or not. Family, I said. Rent is something I pay. I purchase my own food. I assist with household tasks. How is that insufficient? I could sense the tension in the air as the room fell silent for a while. Brielle just sat there content as though she had already triumphed. Mom said, maybe we should reconsider your living arrangement if you're not willing to assist. I felt sick to my stomach. Are you saying you'll throw me out? Naturally not, Mom said quickly. However, we might need to talk about raising your rent if you're unwilling to make a larger contribution. I was shocked by what I heard. If you can call it that, I had done all in my power to be a good renter. They were now attempting to use guilt to get me to perform tasks that weren't mine. Are you really going to do this? With trembling voice, I asked. I didn't want to be Brill's free nanny. Will you penalize me for that? As Dad said, it's not punishment. It has to do with belonging to the family. Additionally, it's about you supporting Brielle as you always have. I got up from the table and answered, You're attempting to include me in it now? Mom shouted, Don't talk about your sister like that. I'm finished. I turned to face the stairs and stated that. Do you wish to assist Brielle? Okay, but don't include me. With my heart hammering against my chest, I hurried upstairs and closed the door to my room. What had just happened was unbelievable to me. Although I had always knew my parents liked Brielle, this was something else entirely. It appeared to be a matter of control. They planned to keep me living with them so they could force me to comply with their wishes. I found Brielle's smug smile to be the most remembered part of the talk. As if nothing were amiss, she sat there looking through her phone and hardly spoke. And I guess it wasn't in her view. Her parents were already making every effort to please her, and now they were trying to include me as well. That night, I doubt I slept for more than a couple of hours. I would mentally relive the discussion each time I closed my eyes, recalling all the things I should have said but didn't. When my alarm went off the following morning, I was still irritated, but I also felt stuck. I couldn't simply walk away. I thought about moving out and having a house of my own, but it wasn't that easy. I had only been a teacher for a few months and was still trying to save costs. I couldn't live alone on my salary since the rent in the area was too high. At home, the following 3 days were strained. My parents were clearly angry with me, but they began using passive-aggressive language instead of talking about it. Having so much spare time after work must be pleasant. One evening when I entered the house, Mom made a remark. Yeah, some people don't have that luxury, Dad said. Giving his newspaper a fleeting glance, I chose to ignore them and went straight to my room. I had no interest in arguing at this moment. I didn't have the energy to cope with it, and I knew that whatever I said would just make things worse. In the meantime, Riel was enjoying life to the fullest. She was not even yet a resident. She acted as though she already owned the house, though, and was there almost every day saturating the living room with her possessions. As if it were no big problem, she would leave her shoes on the couch, her purse on the dining table, and strange shopping bags scattered about. She was eating ice cream and watching a reality program on the couch when I arrived home one evening. When I walked in, she didn't even recognize me. She glanced up, gave me a grudging hello, and went back to watching TV. For a brief while, I waited for her to say anything else, like an apology or just a simple thank you for not losing her cool in the face of the circumstance, but she didn't. Half of my groceries were gone when I went to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. How is the bread I purchased doing lost? How about yogurt lost? Not even my leftovers from the previous evening remained. Have you consumed my food? I asked, going back into the living room. Riel didn't even raise his head. In between ice cream licks, Mom responded, I could. The cost was not borne by her. I lost my temper. Riley eventually rolled her eyes and turned to face me. Riley, calm down. It's only food. It's my food, I said, raising my voice. Go purchase your own cheese if you want groceries. Ariel put her dish down on the coffee table and said, You don't have to be such a drama queen. You're behaving as though I took your automobile. I was at a loss for words. Brielle took her phone and started messaging someone while I stood there, furious, utterly ignoring me once more. Although I knew it wouldn't change anything, I wanted to scream at her for being conceited and self-centered, because her parents let it shit. Brielle had been able to get away with this type of behavior her entire life, and now they were trying to implicate me. I was making coffee in the kitchen the following morning when Mom cornered me. She said sharply, You must apologize to your sister. For what purpose? I asked, honestly puzzled. for causing her to feel uncomfortable. Mom crossed her arms and said, "She is going through a lot right now, and you being unpleasant is the last thing she needs." "Are you serious?" I turned to her and inquired. She pretended it wasn't a huge problem while eating all of my meals. How can I blame that mom's side as though I were the one being irrational? "Riley, it's just food. More may always be purchased." "The point isn't that," I answered while trying to maintain a steady tone. "The main thing is that you're allowing her to get away with disrespecting people's limits." "Limits?" Mom questioned, almost laughing. "Now too, this is her home. You must develop your sharing skills." I knew then that I couldn't make sense of her. Mom didn't want to hear my version of events. She only wanted me to follow the rules and act in the family's best interests. Things worsened during the course of the next week. My parents started to imply that they would raise my rent if I didn't help. Brielle kept bringing more things into the house, packing boxes and furniture into the basement. Because the bathroom below wasn't functioning properly, she even began using mine. I made an effort to avoid them, but it seems like they were all trying to draw me into their mess. Dad was in the living room one evening when I got home, clutching what looked like a financial spreadsheet. "We need to talk?" he added, gesturing for me to take a seat. After some hesitation, I sat on the couch's edge and prepared myself for what was about to happen. As Brielle moved in, Dad tapped the page with his pen and said, "We've been looking at the numbers. Costs are increasing. We believe that you should give more." "I already have rent from you," I answered. "How much more are you looking for?" Dad gave a shrug. "That's still a mystery to us. This appears to be the greatest option, though, if you're unwilling to assist with the infant." I was shocked by what I heard. They were actually trying to get me to babysit by using my rent as leverage. "This is absurd," I stood up and yelled. "For what I receive here, I already pay more than enough. Just let me know if you want me to go." "You're not being asked to leave," Dad answered quickly. "All we ask is that you do your share." "My part," I said again. "You mean the bit about Brill?" Dad parted his lips to respond, but I stopped him in his tracks. I slammed the door behind me as I left the room and went straight to my bedroom. I knew then that I couldn't continue in this manner. I couldn't continue to live in a household where my parents treated me like cheap labor and disregarded my limits. I had no idea when or how. However, I was convinced of one thing. I had to go. Every time Brielle waltzed around the house as like she owned it, that notion became louder in my mind. When my parents attempted to get me to help, it was completely different to desire to go and really do it. The idea of uprooting my life so quickly was daunting, and I didn't have enough saved to comfortably purchase my own home. But I knew there was no way I could remain. It would never stop if I allowed them to pressure me into taking on the role of Brill's backup parent right away. They simply kept adding things to me until I was trapped. I didn't want to be resentful and sad when I woke up in that house 5 years later. I got down with my computer and made myself a cup of coffee the following morning. To keep track of my expenses, which included rent, groceries, gas, and student loans, I started a spreadsheet. Although I wasn't particularly good at saving money, I did manage to put away a certain amount each month. After adding everything up, I saw that if I could find a place that was affordable and cut up on frills for a while, I could manage to relocate. It couldn't have come at a better time. Harper, one of my coworkers, said a few weeks ago that she was looking for a roommate. It feels like a lifeline now, but I hadn't paid any attention to it before. I texted her. "Hello, is it still possible to have a roommate?" She answered right away. "Yes, I'm still searching. What piques your interest?" "Yes, perhaps. After work, is it possible for us to speak?" Harper's response was short and straightforward. Naturally, I arrived at school late that afternoon and waited until the hallways were empty before going into Harper's classroom. She was seated at her workstation, grading assignments. "What is going on?" She looked up from her pile of papers and asked. Uncertain of how much to reveal, I hesitated for a moment. Finally, I answered, "I'm considering leaving my parents' house. They're complicating everything." Harper gave me a nod as though she understood without my explanation. "The deal is still available," she clarified. "Although it's not very large, it's tidy, and we would divide everything equally. The monthly rent is $800. Included are utilities. That was manageable, even if it was a little higher than I had intended. When is the best time for someone to move in? Yesterday, I asked you." "But seriously, anytime if you're in the rooms, yours," she said. I told her that I would inform her by the end of the week, but I had already made up my mind. This was how I got out. After that, I needed to figure out how to get out without making any more noise. I knew my parents would try to thwart my plan if they found out too soon. To stop me from saving anything, They would accuse me, argue with me, and potentially even increase my rent right away. So I said nothing. I started packing slowly, concentrating on clothing, personal belongings, necessities, and whatever I couldn't afford to replace. In case someone was interested, I kept everything in my car's trunk covered with a blanket. I started recording everything at the same moment just in case. I took pictures of my equipment, furnishings, and room. Anything that could someday become controversial. I was aware from past experience that Brielle had a tendency to lose track of who owned what, and I didn't want to be the one to lose my possessions when she left one night when everyone was asleep. I duly delivered my 30-day notice by printing out a letter. After doing some research online, I found that even if I wasn't technically a renter, it was still a good idea to get everything in writing. They accusing me of abruptly departing was the last thing I wanted. That night, I didn't get much sleep because I kept looking at the clock and listening for any noises that may mean someone was awake. I finally slid the envelope beneath my parents' bedroom door around 6 in the morning. The response was prompt. That day, Mom and Dad were waiting for me in the living room when I got home from work. "What is this?" Dad asked, displaying the letter, as though it were an insult. "This is my notice," I stated firmly. "This is what you're actually doing," Mom asked, her voice shaky already. "Yes," I said firmly. "I'll be leaving at the end of the month after finding a place. You can't simply walk away." Mom clarified. "How about Brielle? How is the infant doing?" I inhaled deeply and made an effort to stay composed. I'm not in charge of Brielle or the baby. I've tried my hardest to help out here, but I can't continue to live this way. "What's the matter with you?" Dad's voice rose as he asked. "Before you weren't as obstinate. We've helped you get off the ground and allowed you to reside here among other things." "And you pay us back like this?" I resisted the need to yell and tightened my hands. "Rent is something I pay." I clenched my teeth in response. I purchased my own food. Since the day I graduated, I have taken responsibility for my own actions. I am no longer a child. Furthermore, I'm not your fallback option for Brielle. Not surprisingly, Mom started weeping. When things didn't go her way, she would always weep. "How are you able to harm us?" she sobbed in front of your sister. I remained silent. I saw that there was no need. They refused to listen, and I had no intention of changing my mind. Those were some of the most embarrassing days of my life. Other than the occasional guilt trip, my parents didn't talk to me very much. Brielle proceeded to occupy the house as though it were already hers, acting as though nothing had happened. One evening, I came home to see that she had moved more of her possessions into the basement, pushing clothing into the closet and placing boxes on top of the sofa. She appeared to be occupying every square inch of space that was open to her. As I went in, she added, "I hope you don't mind?" I didn't answer. I ignored the knot of anger growing in my chest and just went upstairs and closed the door to my room. I increased my preparations in the last few days before my move. I arranged for Harper to pick up the keys, packed the remainder of my possessions, and double-checked my budget. Even though everything was falling into place, I couldn't shake the nagging fear. The morning I formally moved out was the hardest. I'd made plans for Harper to drop over with her car, and we would pick up the rest of my stuff before heading over to her apartment. I believed that I had carefully arranged everything so that Mom and Dad would be too busy with their morning tasks to notice me, and Brielle would still be asleep. Nothing in my family ever goes as smoothly, of course. I heard my father's shoes shuffle down the hallway as I was halfway through packing boxes to go to my car. At the top of the steps, he came out. "What are you doing?" He made a demand. I continued to move. "I'm leaving today, like I mentioned," I mumbled as I picked up another box and left. He yelled after me outside, "You can't just sneak out like this." "Riley, we're a family. Are you leaving your family behind?" I turned to him and put the gift in my car's trunk. "I'm not going to desert anyone," I answered coolly. "I'm making the decision to live my own life. There is a distinction." Dad seemed to want to argue, but Mom came to the doorway before he could say anything. She had her arms folded and tears streaming down her face. "This is what you're actually doing." Her voice cracked as she asked. "Yes," I said, forcefully maintaining my position. "How about Brielle?" She cried as she asked. "How is the infant doing?" Feeling the weight of the discourse, I let out a sigh. "Come down on me. I've already told you, Mom, that I don't care about Brielle or the baby. I can't keep giving up my life to correct the faults that triggered her. You have no right to discuss your sister in such a way." She raised her voice and demanded. "She's trying her hardest. As she said, I said. Because it appears to me that she is simply waiting for everyone else to finish the task for her." Disorganized but attentive, Brielle emerged from the basement. As the situation unfolded in the driveway, she grinned. "Mom, don't worry." Her tone was cynical as she added, "We don't need Riley anyhow, even if she wants to write a selfish letter." I clenched my hands, fighting the want to retaliate. Rather, I turned to face Harper, who had just pulled up in her car. I said, ignoring the noise behind me, "Let's get this done." Harper gave me a pitying glance and then began helping me load the remainder of my stuff into the vehicles. My parents were still fighting in the background, utilizing every possible guilt trip that they could come up with. "Now who will assist us?" Dad shouted. "How could you be so callous?" Mom broke down. While everything was going on, Brielle leaned against the doorframe and watched everything as though it were a live performance for her amusement. I felt as though I had completed a marathon by the time we had loaded everything. I stood in the driveway and gave the house I had spent so many years in one final glance. I was relieved by it, even though it should have been a bittersweet occasion. I turned on the car and drove off. Harper is right behind. As soon as I pulled into Harper's apartment building, I felt at ease. Although it was unpretentious, it was tidy, serene, and above all, dramatic. After Harper helped me move everything inside, I unpacked and got settled in my new room. Within an hour. After that, we discussed work while sitting on the couch. It seemed typical, like a glimpse of the life I had been missing while ensnared in the chaos of my family. However, the peace lasted for around 2 hours. My phone began to vibrate constantly with voicemails, texts, and calls. My parents, aunts, and cousins were involved. Apparently, my mother had already told everyone that I had left the family and everyone had an opinion. How could you harm your sister like Way Riley? My Aunt Denise left me a voicemail. She is fragile and pregnant. You care about your family, don't you? You're not even close to being selfish. A cousin also texted to say that Brill's social media posts were the worst part. With comments like, "Some people would rather run away than help their own family." She posted pictures of her growing baby bump going into full victim mode. At least my child will understand what true love is. I blocked her right away. Even though it was annoying, I resisted the want to return. I reminded myself that I had left for precisely this reason, to escape the drama and manipulation that accompanied being a member of my family. Things at work became more stranger the next week. During my lunch break, my mother came to school sobbing and asking to talk to me. She was in full-blown tantrum mode, complaining that Brielle was disintegrating without me and that I'd destroyed the family. It was embarrassing that my principal had to step in and ask her to leave. I avoided making eye contact with everyone for the remainder of the day, since I knew they were probably curious about the family drama I was involved in, but it really worked to my advantage. Life isn't that easy, but I believed I was over the home and all the turmoil it had brought. After about 2 weeks, I discovered that I had forgotten several important documents, such as my teaching certification tax returns and other documents pertaining to my job. I was so focused on leaving the house that I neglected to check the little drawer where I generally kept these kinds of things. After my mother arrived to my school, I told a few of my coworkers about all that had been going on. Without hesitation, they stepped up to give their support. "Tell us when you're prepared to pick up the remaining items." Harper gave me her spare vehicle keys and continued, "We'll get there quickly." In order to get the rest of my stuff back, Harper and Zoe, a coworker, went to my parents' house a few days later. I miscalculated how low they were willing to go, but I believed I was ready for whatever garbage they would do. My room had changed completely by the time we got there. In a territorial conquest, Brielle had relocated more of her possessions to merge them with mine. I had clothes shoved inside my dresser that weren't mine. My desk was piled high with random baby items, and my nightstand was entirely cleared out and filled with her possessions. What's happening? More than everybody else, I whispered to myself. With a cup of coffee in her hand and an air of indifference, Rael entered the threshold. "Oh, hey," she said nonchalantly, as if like nothing had occurred. My belongings must have gotten muddled up. Right now, it's difficult to determine what is mine and what is yours. I looked at her, not understanding the audacity of what she had spoken. "Do you mean the items that have been in my room for years?" She drank her coffee and shrugged. "You've already gone, however. What does it matter then?" She clearly intended to make things more challenging for me by doing this. She was unaware, however, that I had anticipated this very situation. I pulled out my phone and opened the album with pictures of my room before she moved there. "I have pictures of everything already." I gave her an explanation while displaying the screen and compiling a list of everything I owned, including the serial numbers of my devices. Brill's face contorted in annoyance, but before she could respond, her parents showed up. "What's happening?" Dad asked. "How come you're in here?" His voice was angry as he urged. "I came to retrieve some forgotten items." Trying not to lose my cool, I answered, "But Brielle is saying she can't tell what's mine and what's hers. Everything I possess has paperwork." Dad's face grew stern. I'll contact the cops if you steal anything that isn't yours. I gave a short, non-humorous chuckle. Go ahead, I said. We can also discuss with them whether it is lawful for you to enter my room without permission and to mess with my possessions. He became silent at that. I was assisted in sorting through the mess by Harper and Zoe. When I picked up my laptop, Brielle tried to argue, claiming it was hers, but I only needed to show her the purchase paperwork and a picture of the serial number. She grew more irate the more she realized her scheme would fail. She threw her fists in the air and cried out, "This is so unfair! Are you robbing a pregnant woman?" I looked over at her. I'm tired. You are the only one attempting to take anything here, I said strongly. Similar to how you've been attempting to take away my independence and time by asking me to serve as your unpaid nanny. No more. I got into Harper's vehicle and didn't turn around. 6 months have passed since then. The baby was born to Brielle, but and everything is collapsing just as I anticipated. My parents are currently unable to work full-time jobs and provide the childcare they tried to force upon me. The few family members who still talk to me say they're exhausted and overburdened. Real hasn't even looked for a job. Given that she spends most of her time scrolling through her phone and neglecting her responsibilities, her claim that she is too stressed to work is probably true. With a wailing baby and an unfinished basement renovation that is eating up their retirement funds, she is still living at my parents' house. They've reportedly tried to get in touch with me several times since I left. First, I got a nasty text message accusing me of being unappreciative. They went on guilt trips about how much the baby needed me when that didn't work. Sending pictures of my niece along with comments like, "Don't you want to meet your only niece?" is the newest tactic. And she requires the presence of her aunt. I've put up email filters and banned them all on social media to stop them from communicating with me. I've received updates from a few family members who are aware of my predicament, but I've made it plain that I have no interest in repairing relationships unless my parents and Brielle own their wrongdoing and make sincere changes. Ironically, I probably would have complied if they had just asked for occasional babysitting help like regular folks and respected my boundaries. I love kids and would have been happy to help them occasionally, but their attempt to compel me to attend daycare full-time while disregarding my freedom and privacy crushed any chance of that ever occurring. That's my story, absolutely. All of this taught me that sometimes stopping your family's destructive behavior is the best thing you can do for them.